If I were to ask you, who would you choose for your country's national hero? Who would you pick? Would you pick a queen or a king, or a military leader, or a rebel, or a freedom fighter? And as you know, in Scotland, we have loads of all of the above. But the person whose birthday we celebrate every year is none of these things. It is, of course, a poet, a man of letters, a man of words, not a man of the sword. And also a man who started in the most humble of places. He came from the most impoverished of backgrounds and yet rose to the highest heights of literary achievement. And I've always been intrigued as to how that journey was made possible for him. And in fact, it's down to a combination of two things. First of all, the invention of the printing press, which brought mass production of the printed word to everybody. And secondly, the extraordinary Education Acts of the 17th century in Scotland, which put a school in every single parish in Scotland. And that combination was immensely powerful. I'm now going to introduce to you two more people who I'm sure you don't know, but are in their own way just as amazing as Robert Burns. And the first is my great-great-grandmother. She was born in 1860. She had 10 children, the last of whom was born in 1896, 3 days after the death of her husband. She was a tough old lady living in tough times. And just under 60 years later, my mother graduated in law from the University of Edinburgh, the first in her family ever to make it to university. I was intrigued to know what it was that changed the lives of these women and made this possible for them. And of course, it was another invention which transformed their lives, something just as transformational as the printing press. It was the washing machine. Prior to the invention of the washing machine, women were chained to the sink. Grandma Watson probably spent 2 whole days out of every week simply washing and drying the family's clothes. And of course, the washing machine is just a proxy for labor-saving devices more generally. But these three things, universal education, the printing press, and the washing machine, domestic mechanization, they have one thing in common, which is their dramatic multiplier effect on human capital and thus on economic potential. Now, the first two led directly to the Enlightenment period, that wonderful period of flourishing of science and the arts and philosophy in Scotland in the 18th century. It led, of course, to Robert Burns, and it also led ultimately to Adam Smith and his seminal book, The Wealth of Nations, which is the establishment of the modern economy. Ultimately, it gave us inventions as diverse as the television set and the steam engine, and in fact also the bank overdraft, although we like to talk a little bit less about that one. When it comes to the washing machine, and we look at what the washing machine gave us, that was a large part of the 20th century's explosive growth. Because suddenly the female half of the population was liberated from the wash, spin, reload cycle that it had been on before. And just look what this did to female participation in the workforce. Back in 1911, some 35% of women were involved in paid work outside the home. In the UK in 2014, that's up at 68%, and in fact in Scotland it's even higher, it's about 72%. But what is fascinating is to look at who amongst these women were actually working. Because unmarried women were working at about the same rate in the workforce as women are today, just about 2/3. But married women, as opposed to unmarried women, only 10% of them worked outside the home because of the intensity of labor in the domestic situation. So we've made huge progress, and today, women are the main breadwinners in some 40% of households. But despite that, only 57% of women are working full-time, as opposed to 87% of men. So huge progress, but there's still an awful lot further to go. And I want to talk today a little bit about what we need to do, what are the changes we need to create in society to get even better inclusion from women in our society and unlock that economic potential. Because the potential is huge. The OECD estimates that if we could raise female participation in the workforce to the same level as men, by the year 2030, that would equate to something like an extra £200 billion, or 10% of the size of the UK economy. And extrapolating that to Scotland would increase the size of the Scottish economy by something like 7%, or around about £16 billion a year. That is a huge increase. So what do we have to do to make that happen? How do we create those conditions? And more importantly, who is it that we want to do it? Who needs to do it? And of course, the answer when you look at society more generally is everybody. We all play a part in this. But there are three particular groups which are critically important to this. And they're also groups that are very well represented in the room here today, which is partly why I have chosen them. So let's look at each of these in turn. Let's look at policymakers first of all. Policymakers set the overall structure for how our society functions. So they affect the structures of primary school right the way through to tertiary education, from childcare through to the care of the elderly, an increasing issue in society today. But specifically, the sharing of parental leave, which allows parents to choose flexibly who does what within the family environment, high quality, affordable preschool childcare, and high quality, affordable wraparound care once children enter the school system are both really important in giving families the flexibility of working out how to organise their family lives. There are other areas of policy which are also extremely important, and one of them is around the school curriculum. The UK lags many other economies in the number of girls studying science, technology, engineering and maths at university. And this starts because they give up these subjects too early at school, particularly physics, which then closes off the option for many careers to them in the future. I would like to see schools and the school curriculum ensure that both boys and girls study the humanities and sciences right the way through school. And I'd like to see our university sector take advantage of the traditional four-year undergraduate degree to allow more flexibility and transitions between subjects at university, to open up the choices of careers and opportunities to everybody once our young people leave university. Now, there's a second group which are vitally important in all of this, which is the media, whether it's broadcast, the printed word, or web-based media. Study after study shows that children from the very earliest of ages are bombarded with media stereotypes, which shape their view about what is normal. Life is really tough for the little boy whose favourite colour is pink. And he very quickly learns that that's not regarded as an acceptable choice by the majority of his peers and other people in society. And likewise, if you ask children, very young children, to draw a scientist, the majority will draw a man, even though we've got very many successful female scientists. But by propagating these myths, we very quickly teach children about what it's acceptable for them to aspire to. And for the boy that wants to be a ballet dancer or enter a caring profession, or the girl that wants to be a physicist or an Olympic rower, the role models are few and far between. They exist, of course they do, but they're often drowned out by media stereotypes. So I would like all of our Scottish-based media to sign up to a pledge to banish bias, to ensure an equal profile to both genders, and not just around gender, but increase the share of voice over the whole broad mix of diversity that we have in our society. And this would put Scotland at the absolute forefront of inclusive leadership internationally. The final group that I want to talk to today is employers, because employers not only have a huge role to play in this, but arguably the most to gain. Because one of the things that we know is that better decisions come from more mixed teams. The world is a competitive place out there. And if we can eliminate some of the biases that creep into our processes, we could unlock so much more human capital. We know that girls and young women do extremely well through the anonymised and therefore largely meritocratic processes that exist in the examination system. But when they enter the workplace with its much more subjective criteria, they start to lag behind their male counterparts. And it's not because our young women lack ambition or confidence. It's because the processes themselves, which we often believe are meritocratic, simply aren't. The evidence is against us. And that's because all of us, everybody sitting in this room, have our own unconscious biases. We don't know we have them because the clue is in the name. They're unconscious. But once we admit that they exist, we can start to design processes to get rid of them. How do we do that? Well, there's an interesting example if you look at the orchestral sector. Orchestras discovered that they were getting fewer women coming through successfully at audition than they felt they ought to. So a number of orchestras removed some of the potential for bias to keep into the process. They installed screens, which meant you didn't know who was playing, and they even installed carpet so that you couldn't hear the click of the heels on the floor. And when they did that, the number of women auditioning successfully dramatically improved. So we can tackle these processes, although in a business world, adding a screen and adding a carpet are unlikely to do it. But there are still things that we can do, and here are a few of them. First of all, remove the name and the name of school attended from CVs and application forms. Will take away the possibility for unintentional screening of people who don't conform to your idea of what is normal. Secondly, being as objective as possible in your measurement of performance. One of the things that we see is that when there is any ambiguity in performance measurement, there's the possibility for bias to creep in. And that's a really important area to tackle, as objective and unambiguous appraisal processes as possible. Thirdly, open recruitment processes. Too often, we approach people who we know, who are in our circle, to invite them to apply for a job, and therefore give lots of people who are not in that circle, exclude them from being able to have a go at that job. So open and transparent recruitment processes. But the final and the most important thing is that to tackle a problem, you first of all need to know that it exists, which is why the gathering of data is desperately important. You need to gather the data around diversity and equality, around promotion and pay, to know if you have a problem, and then start to look at what you can do about that problem. So I would like a kind of badge of honor, a kite mark for organizations that commit both to transparency and action around these really important issues. Because, of course, this isn't just about gender. It's about all sorts of aspects of diversity in society, whether social background, ethnic, cultural, disability, age, a whole host of different things. And by doing that, we could make our companies better. And the most important thing on this respect is that it's not about one person doing better or worse than another person. It's about competitive advantage. Because as I said before, we know that mixed teams are better problem solvers than homogeneous ones, because they benefit from the diversity of view around the table. And that ability to solve problems better and make better decisions is true whether you're talking about a capital investment program, a new product design, or business strategy. And I think this is something that, if there's one thing to take away from today that I'd like everybody to think about, is that this is not a zero-sum game. If some people feel that if one part of society starts to increase its influence in positions of leadership, another part of society must suffer. And that misses the point that it's not about who gets what share of the pie. It's about the ability to increase the size of the pie overall. Think back to that extra 16 billion in the Scottish economy and what that would mean in terms of the number of jobs created. Now, the question that we must ask ourselves is, why not here? Why not now? Scotland is a small, agile, and vibrantly diverse community, and we have the capacity to build on that diversity to create a truly world-leading economy. And we don't have to wait for anyone else to do that. Each and every person in this room can walk out of here today and start to do that. And together, we can create a new era of inclusive enlightenment. Thank you very much indeed.